thoughts on the NFL standings, where all 32 teams will stand going into the 2024 season. The top 10 head coaches, I believe, are on the hot seat going into 2024. Plus, more on some baseball, my Cleveland Guardians and the Alex Cobb injury, and more of which teams I think are going to make a deep run in the postseason. Hi, it's Andrew Hoty, and welcome to the first edition of Raw Takes. Welcome to the first edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Hope everyone's having a fantastic day. I just want to say I'm based in Cleveland, Ohio, Northeast Ohio, born and raised my entire life. I am going to come at things with an objective view, however, a lot of the time. For example, I'm not a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but I am going to just say right off the rip, the Pittsburgh Steelers are a great organization. I don't like the New York Yankees either, but obviously they have a huge history. So I'm always going to come at topics with an objective perspective when it comes to me talking about your team in particular, but I will always have a little bit of that Cleveland bias, and I'm not going to hide that based on my Northeast Ohio background. With that said, let's get things started with my NFL predictions for all 32 teams and where I think all the teams will stand come the 2024 season. We're going to start things off in the AFC. The AFC is highly competitive. I think probably the most competitive we've seen since the early to mid 2000s. I think there's that many good teams, and obviously only 7 of them can make the postseason, but there's some dud teams I think that are there as well. Now we're going to see play out as the season continues. What those dud teams are, we'll talk about in a little bit, but we're going to go division to division, and I'm going to talk about which teams I think will win the division, lose the division, be in the middle, and maybe be a wild card team. Let's get things started in the AFC East. The AFC East, I'm going to go with the Buffalo Bills winning the division at 12-5. My thoughts on the Buffalo Bills, I think they kind of moved off what has been turning into a negative effect in the locker room with Stephon Diggs trading him to the Houston Texans. I think that's not going to benefit the Texans' sake. He is a good player, but I don't think he is a substantial player that's going to help them nevertheless grow C.J. Stroud, but we'll get to the Texans in a little bit. I think that's going to help the Buffalo Bills because I think it's a noise in the locker room they didn't need, and I think Josh Allen's going to be able to really take control of the offense because of that. This is the best team on paper, in my opinion. I think they have the best coaching staff within the division with Sean McDermott. Josh Allen's going to be really able to run this offense. There's been some significant injuries, though, that I think are a concern roster-wise, but other than that, I think the Buffalo Bills are in a prime position to win the AFC East. With that said, we'll move on to my second place team, which I think will be a wild card as long as Aaron Rodgers stays healthy. The New York Jets will be my number 2 team in the AFC East. I have them going 10-7. So the New York Jets are a little bit of an interesting situation. I think they have a great defense. You talk about players like Sauce Gardner, going to absolutely be a shutdown corner this year. I also think it's important to look at the fact that Aaron Rodgers being healthy for a whole year could really help this offense get moving. They have a lot of the players that we know Aaron Rodgers has good chemistry with. If they could stay on that path, I think the New York Jets are going to be in really good shape. Robert Saleh is on the hot seat. We'll talk about the hot seat coaches in a little bit. But nevertheless, I think it's going to be really important for the New York Jets to figure out what they're going to do with Aaron Rodgers this year and moving forward because they're only going to have this window, seeing we're heading towards the end of his career most likely soon whenever he decides to retire, of course. The New York Jets, to me, are tricky because of that. Because they could really be, obviously, the train goes off the tracks if Aaron Rodgers isn't healthy. But I think it's going to be really important that the New York Jets figure this out with Aaron Rodgers this year. They're absolutely going to have to make some kind of run in order for it to be an extreme success. But they're only going to have this little window, and I think the New York Jets, as long as Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, they're going to start to build upon that window this season. My third place team in the AFC East, I'm going to go with the Miami Dolphins. I am not a fan of the Tua Tagovailoa extension. I think he's the problem in Miami. With that said, I think Mike McDaniel is one heck of an offensive coach. I think he's going to know what he's doing when it comes to building around Tyreek Hill and players such as Jalen Waddle and Tua Tagovailoa's skill set. So I think their offense is going to be okay overall. Tua, I do think, is not the answer long term. And this team last year showed they really didn't play great against elite competition. They were kind of like the Cowboys, per se, of the AFC, where they were really good against all the bad teams, but they really struggled against some of the tougher competition, especially in the AFC. So I want to see what Miami does from that aspect. I still think this is a good football team on paper, and I think they have a good culture and coaching staff. But for me, the Miami Dolphins, their biggest issue is quarterback, on my opinion. And it's going to be interesting to see what takes place with the Dolphins moving forward after this season. But I do think they're a 9-8 team. Don't think they make the playoffs, but they do kind of stay in that bubble, and they play everybody tough. The New England Patriots, I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anybody because the New England Patriots on paper just look terrible. I have them, as my standings currently stand, to get the number 1 pick in 2025. Drake May could be the guy. I'm not sure. I definitely think his ceiling may be a high backup. He's not the guy I thought in this draft would absolutely be the runaway favorite, but we'll have to see what takes place. I personally think the situation in New England is pretty bad now, knowing that Bill Belichick isn't there, but it wasn't going great with him there either way. The Patriots just don't have a good roster on paper. They're a very flawed team. I'm going to be interested to see what Rod Mayo does as a head coach, too, and see what he's able to build upon. But this is going to be a tough season for the New England Patriots. But they are coming off a huge dynasty, so I think in the long run, as an organization led by Robert Kraft, they're going to figure out how to get back to winning long term. But this year, it's going to be an absolute disaster. I don't really have much else to say about the New England Patriots other than that. They're on pace, I think, to get the number 1 pick in 2025. Let's move on to the AFC North. Now, as I said, I'm a Browns fan, so I can go on and on about how much I love the Browns and whatnot and how they're structured, but I'm not taking the Browns to win this division. All 4 teams, to me, are really good on paper, and they have good coaching staffs. And they have good quarterbacks, and organizationally, they're starting to find their own. I think the Haslams have really found their own with the Browns. Obviously, the Rooney family in Pittsburgh and Baltimore, you can't say enough about the great culture they have over there. Cincinnati, I mean, they're kind of still a mom-and-pop organization, but overall, I mean, they did pay Joe Burrow, and since Joe Burrow's gotten there, their culture has drastically shifted as well. So all 4 teams on paper should be really good and playoff contenders. With that being said, though, I don't think all 4 of these teams are going to make the playoffs. There's going to have to be somebody in last place. But they all finished with a record above 500 last year. So it'll be really interesting to see which team it is. I think it's going to come down to an injury, but I'll give you my thoughts right now. I think Cincinnati bounces back. They were in last place, so their schedule is very, very easy going into 2024. I think Joe Burrow is going to have a great season. I think it may come down to a tiebreaker with Kansas City for who may get the number 1 seed, but Joe Burrow tends to play the Chiefs very well, so I think the Chiefs are going to have their hands full when it comes to playing the Bengals, and a healthy Joe Burrow. As long as Joe Burrow is healthy, that's the key thing. Jamar Chase, obviously, is a wide receiver, and as long as they have T. Higgins, I still think that's going to be a lot of production for the Cincinnati offense. Defensively, I still think they're okay, but they're definitely stronger on the offensive standpoint. I think the line has gotten a little bit better. I don't want to say it's a phenomenal offensive line, but it's definitely gotten a little bit better, I think, since Joe Burrow got there. So they're going to have more time for him to throw the football. But that is always kind of been a flaw with the Cincinnati Bengals the last few years. And it's part of why Joe Burrow's gotten hurt. But as long as they can protect Joe Burrow, keep him healthy, the Cincinnati Bengals, on paper, to me, have the best offense and should win the AFC North. The Cleveland Browns, I have at second place as a wild card team, but I have them going 10-7, a game regression, only because defense year to year, usually it does stick around, but I do think there's going to be somewhat of a defensive fallout. On the road, it's going to come down to if they can play better on the road, because they were awful on the road last year, the defense in some games. I mean, there's some games I look at that they let up 30 points in Baltimore, even though we still won that game, but that was really an offensive performance that did that. So for me, the Browns defensively are going to be the thing to look at if it can translate year to year. With Jim Schwartz, I think it will, but I don't know if it's going to be the same level of defense we saw last year. I think offensively, the Browns are on pace to be a much better team as long as Deshaun Watson stays healthy. I think when you look at the backup quarterback spot as well, Jameis Winston absolutely, I think, could handle running this Browns offense. But, there's still question marks just based on Deshaun Watson, and if Deshaun Watson's not in the game, will these quarterbacks be able to hold up with the Browns offense? We now know there's been some dilemmas with Amari Cooper as well in terms of the contract situation. Hopefully that's been figured out, but the Brandon Ayuk situation in San Francisco kind of played a role in it too. I mean, obviously it didn't end up coming to fruition, but for me, I think when you look at the Cleveland Browns offensively on paper, this team should be really, really good going into 2024. And I think we're going to see that with Ken Dorsey running the show a little bit, but obviously Kevin Stefanski remaining the play caller. I just think the Browns are going to run into some of those trap games. I think that's the big thing that the Browns are going to struggle with this year. So I have them going 10-7, making it a wild card spot. And they're really going to show that culture has really developed and is able to be sustained. But at the same time, this is a tough schedule for the Browns, and I think that is going to factor into why I have them going 10-7 as opposed to where they went 11-6 last year. My third place team is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers at 9-8. Until I see Mike Tomlin have a losing record, I can't predict him to have a losing record. It's the same thing. Like, I have the Browns most likely losing that game in Pittsburgh that they play this year because they haven't won a regular season game in Pittsburgh since 2003. I was 3 years old the last time the Browns went to Pittsburgh in a regular season game, that's not including the playoff win in 2020, where they went to Pittsburgh and won a game in the regular season. So for me, that's going to be a tricky situation we see with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they're always going to find a way to be relevant this season. We don't know the quarterback situation to an extent yet. I personally think Russell Wilson's going to be the starting quarterback for the first 6 to 7 games, and they may start off 2-5, 3-4 maybe. And then Justin Fields comes in, and then we start to slowly see Pittsburgh pick up the pace a little bit and get themselves back into division contention and playoff contention. The Pittsburgh Steelers are always a tough out for any opponent, not just AFC North teams, but Mike Tomlin's not going anywhere. He obviously got a contract extension too, just like Kevin Stefanski did. So for me, the Pittsburgh Steelers are going 9-8. I just think structurally, quarterback-wise, we're not sure what they're doing yet. Obviously, George Pickens is a great wide receiver. We still have yet to know if they're going to add Brandon Ayuk to the team, but that doesn't look likely. It looks like, for me, from my perspective, I think he's going to stay in San Francisco. But if that happens, then Pittsburgh's offense definitely could be very explosive. Defensively, I still think they have it. Defense is kind of what won them games last year and the year before that when they had Kenny Pickett under center. So for me, Pittsburgh's in a really interesting situation, but I can't pick them to go to the playoffs. I do have them going 9-8 as they just try to figure out their quarterback situation. I think Justin Fields will end up being their future, but 2024 is kind of a bridge year for them to build upon into 2025. That's my thoughts on them. And then we'll head over to Baltimore, who I think will go in last place this year at 8-9. That's primarily because I think Lamar Jackson kind of got lucky a little bit that he wasn't one of the quarterbacks that got injured. Just based on his style of play, I think he's very injury prone. Still, when he's healthy, he's great, so it's going to be tough for me to say that the Baltimore Ravens are going to go 8-9, which I have them at. But I just think injuries are going to build up with the Ravens again. They're kind of due for it like they were in 2021. They started off 8-3 and then finished 8-9 that year because injuries really went out of control with their roster. But with that being said, there is flaws to how Lamar Jackson plays football. I think teams year to year start to expose it after he has a good season. We've seen that in the past. So for me, the Baltimore Ravens are really in kind of that tricky situation where they had a really good season and they're going to kind of come back down to earth a little bit. But we'll have to see what takes place. I mean, it's still a very good culture. John Harbaugh, the head coach, they added Derrick Henry to the mix, so we got to expect that their running game is going to be spot on. This could be a really good football team, but when I look at the AFC North and the other three teams they have to compete against and how they're going to be playing this year, on my opinion, compared to where I see the Baltimore Ravens, I think the Ravens drop off a little bit from that success in 2023, come back down to earth. Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh kind of pick up the pace, and that's what we'll see for the Baltimore Ravens in 2024. For me, this is tricky because I really want to root for the Houston Texans, being an Ohio guy with C.J. Stroud under center, but I think there's going to be a drop-off from them. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I think, are also in a much more prime position to try to win this division based on the fact they gave Trevor Lawrence all that money, and they still have a great roster. You look at names like ETN, Josh Allen. That team is loaded overall, and I think they really underperformed towards the end of the year last year. So for me, I'm going to take the Jacksonville Jaguars to win this division at 11-6. I think they need to bounce back. I think Doug Peterson needs it first off because he may be coaching for his job. This is a tricky situation in Jacksonville. But they missed the playoffs last year by a game, essentially. If they would have beaten Tennessee the last week of the season, they would have been there. But the train really fell off the rail last year for the Jacksonville Jaguars after a great start to the year. I remember when the Browns played Jacksonville last year, and I believe they won 31-27 or 28. I think it was 31-27 with Joe Flacco under center. I mean, the Jaguars just looked gassed in that game. I think they really had their best moments at the beginning of the season, but on paper, the Jacksonville Jaguars should be one of the best teams in the NFL, and I think they're going to get back to that standard this year. Doug Peterson's a great head coach. I think he'll figure it out, but we'll get into where I think Doug Peterson is on the hot seat list in a little bit. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I think, are going to win this division because I think the Houston Texans are going to have a little bit of a drop-off, and that's why I have them in second place. C.J. Stroud, to me, I think he's great, and I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and I'm rooting for him as a Buckeye fan. However, the problem with C.J. Stroud, I think, is the fact that he had such a good rookie season. We're going to see him struggle a little bit. There's film on him now. He had a troubling playoff game where I think the Baltimore Ravens defense kind of exposed the way he plays. And I don't like adding Stephon Diggs to this roster. I think that's kind of like when the Browns traded for Odell Beckham Jr., and that was just a lot of noise, I think, for the Houston Texans. So there's going to be those expectations for this team. I think they go 9-8. They're going to be a bubble playoff team, but for me, I think they're going to come back down to earth a little bit. And I think DeMeco Ryans is a great head coach, but they're going to have to really work on this chemistry because C.J. Stroud started off really good. I just think we're going to see a little bit of a sophomore slump. Tank Dell, if he's healthy, I think is going to be another great wide receiver. But I think Tank Dell's ceiling for his career is higher than Stephon Diggs. I really, really do. That's why I don't love the Stephon Diggs mix either, but we'll have to see what takes place with the Houston Texans. Me, personally, I think we're going to see a little bit of a drop-off for Houston this year, which brings me to my number 3 team. This is just tough because Indianapolis, I think, is building a good culture with Shane Steichen. However, I just need to see more from Anthony Richardson for me to buy in. So I have the Colts going 7-10 in my third-place team in the AFC South. Shane Steichen, I think, is going to be a great head coach, but there's just a lot of pieces to the puzzle to figure out. Obviously, if Jonathan Taylor running the football, that should be totally fine for Indy moving forward. But other than that, I think they've proven themselves to be a much better organization than a lot of us realize because a lot of us picked the Colts last season to be a 4-13, 5-12 team. But the Colts really proved us wrong in that aspect. They went 9-8 last year. Obviously, Anthony Richardson got hurt. Who knows what would have happened if he stayed healthy. But Gardner Minshew held down the fort, and the Colts ended up getting a winning record. They're kind of a fun watch. They're a tough out. They played every team hard last year, including my Browns. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what takes place with the Indianapolis Colts. I just think they have a good culture going, but with Anthony Richardson being essentially kind of in that rookie position still. But you never know. Joe Burrow went to the Super Bowl after he got hurt his rookie year. But I just think Anthony Richardson's going to have a lot of growth to go along with. So I have them going 7-10, just kind of as a bridge year. Let Anthony Richardson develop as the schedule is going to be a little tough for the Indianapolis Colts. But I will say, Joe Flacco, since he was with the Browns and the good season he had last year, that is going to tremendously help Anthony Richardson develop as a quarterback. My fourth place team in the AFC South is obviously the Tennessee Titans. I have them going 4-13. Offensive line-wise, I think they're going to really benefit from the fact they're getting Bill Callahan. But Brian Callahan's a rookie head coach. Will Levis is going with his second head coach. I don't think Mike Vrabel should have been fired at all. That's my personal opinion. I think the Tennessee Titans just really don't have an identity. So I think it's going to be weird to see how they figure out what's what and who's who, and no more Derrick Henry running the football. It's a tough team for me to say that that's going to go out there and win 10 games. I just, on paper, they don't really have anything to me. And they have a new rookie head coach and a second-year quarterback. Will Levis, I think, does have a high ceiling. I'll say that. But in a division where you have Trevor Lawrence, C.J. Stroud, and possibly Anthony Richardson coming up, I think it's going to be really challenging for the Tennessee Titans to rattle off some wins this year. So I'm going to have them go 4-13, and they're going to be my second worst team in the AFC. That's just my opinion with the Tennessee Titans. Rough year down in Nashville, I think, for football fans. But we'll get over now to the AFC West, where I think the division is actually kind of loaded, excluding the Denver Broncos, but I'll get to why I have them in last place in a little bit. We'll start off with the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously. Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, that offense, obviously, I think is going to do what they do best. Andy Reid, obviously drawing up the plays there. And Steve Spagnuolo's defense was one of the best in the NFL last year. I expect that to continue. But kind of like the Browns, I think there's going to be a little bit of a drop-off based on the fact there's going to be some more film on the defense. But the defense is really what won them games last year, so I think that is going to roll into how Kansas City wins this year. But I think you're going to see Mahomes and Kelce have even better seasons than they did in the regular season last year. Kansas City's in a really interesting situation, I think, with the 2 Super Bowl championships back-to-back. Are they going to win a third one? I think that remains yet to be seen. I don't believe it has been done before, so I think it's going to be really tough for them. I think there will be a different Super Bowl winner this year, but Kansas City is still Kansas City. They're going to be competing week in and week out. This is a tough, good football team and has the best culture, I think, in the NFL. So we'll have to see what takes place with the Kansas City Chiefs. But for me right now, I have them going 13-4, winning the AFC West. For me, number 2, I'm going to take the Los Angeles Chargers, and it's not just because I think they have Justin Herbert as their quarterback. I think Joe Alt's going to be a really good player as a rookie. But the other thing is I think Jim Harbaugh is a great addition. I think Jim Harbaugh, knowing his brother John working under Andy Reid all that time, he's going to know a little bit of the Chiefs' schemes to a degree. So I think bringing Jim Harbaugh's pedigree of his career with him, you're going to see him really start to shine in a big market like LA too. Justin Herbert, I think, has the perfect head coach for him. A guy who I think really wants Justin Herbert and can accommodate to his playing style. And that's going to be the big thing with the Chargers is how well is Justin Herbert going to play. I see the Chargers competing for the AFC West title. I really, really do. With that being said, though, I think the Kansas City Chiefs are just too good. But the Chargers are going to be in the mix, and I think Jim Harbaugh is going to instill some culture within the LA Chargers locker room to really help compete with the big guns like Kansas City. And I think the LA Chargers are going to be a little bit of a threat to possibly win the Super Bowl this year. We'll have to see what takes place. But I think that's a good team down in LA with the Chargers and Justin Herbert under center. So I have them going in second place in the AFC West. For me, third place, the Las Vegas Raiders. I have them going 8-9. It's going to be Antonio Pierce's, I guess you could say, rookie full head season as a head coach. He was an interim last year after they fired Josh McDaniels, who should have never been hired in the first place. And I think the Raiders realized they made a mistake there. But for me, with Antonio Pierce, he kind of reminds me of that Dan Campbell-style coach a little bit, where he's really rah-rah. He's a former player. He can really resonate with players such as Max Crosby, who's on the defensive side of the ball. And Gardner Minshew, they're getting him on the offensive side of the ball. And he had a really good season last year. I think in Indianapolis they're talking about it probably a little bit more than the rest of the national media. But Gardner Minshew is kind of a really good journeyman quarterback right now. I mean, I would want him on my team, especially if you're looking for a bridge kind of guy like the Las Vegas Raiders are. So for me, the Raiders are going to be competing in a lot of games this year, but they're just not going to cross over the hump of the Chargers and the Kansas City Chiefs. But they're going to be in the mix, and as I said, I really like the Antonio Pierce hire. That guy is so rah-rah and can resonate with players. It's like a Dan Campbell hire to me. He maybe isn't, Dan Campbell had so many quotes he said in his press conferences when he was first hired by the Lions that a lot of the media was baffled by it. For me, Antonio Pierce has kind of got that style to him, but the rah-rahness, but he's not as quotable as I think Dan Campbell is. But I think that's a good head coaching hire for players such as Max Crosby. They're really, really rah-rah. I really think the Las Vegas Raiders' future is very bright, but for right now, I'm going to have them go 8-9. It's just tough for me to say that they're really going to be able to cross the hump with Kansas City and the Los Angeles Chargers, but I do think they are going to play them very tough, and they're going to build something good for the future, at least very good for the future. I like the direction of the Raiders in that aspect, but I do not like the direction of the Denver Broncos, and that's why I have them finishing in fourth place. 5-12, I have the Broncos going, and the reason that is it's not because of Sean Payton. He's a great head coach. It's primarily because of the fact that there is just nothing on this roster. It feels depleted. Russell Wilson was just a terrible move for that organization, and it helped them get nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. And now he's playing in Pittsburgh, and they're paying for his salary still. Pittsburgh's not paying for any of it. So Denver's kind of got a loss there, and they just drafted a quarterback, too, in Bo Nix, who's going to need time to develop. That is a tough situation in Denver because now they don't have Jerry Jeudy. He came to Cleveland. So I think it's going to be kind of a mess in Denver, and Sean Payton's going to have to figure his way out of it. It's tough for me with the Denver Broncos. I really see nothing on that roster where I just point my finger and say, that's really good. I think Sean Payton is going to assemble a good staff, and I think he's going to instill that New Orleans Saints-like culture there, but it's going to be years down the line before I think we see the Denver Broncos compete in any way, shape, or form. And not only that, I just think the Denver Broncos are kind of unlucky in a sense that they're in a division with Kansas City. They've struggled against them for years. They only have one win against them, I think, since 2015. So the Kansas City Chiefs have dominated that rivalry. And not only that, the Broncos are also going to be playing the Chargers and the Raiders. Those are tough outs. And the Broncos, after they won that Super Bowl in 2015, have done nothing since. And I don't see the trajectory of the Denver Broncos going any far up compared to where they are right now. And this is really, I think, their worst period in franchise history because the Denver Broncos historically have been so good. So yeah, it's a tough time to be a football fan in Denver, Colorado. But my message to Denver Broncos fans, don't worry, the Nuggets season is right around the corner. All right, so that means for my AFC predictions, I have Cincinnati with the number 1 seed for the tiebreaker with Kansas City. I have Kansas City at 2, At 3, I have Buffalo, Jacksonville 4, LA Chargers 5. I have Cleveland going 6 and New York Jets 7. Those are the playoff teams I think we will see in 2024. As we move things over to the NFC now, we'll start off with the East. This is going to be an interesting pick. I don't think a lot of people are going to look at this team as a contender in any ways, but I think the New York Giants bounce back and have a really good season. I think Brian Daboll is a very good head coach. I think Daniel Jones is not given enough credit for being okay. I don't think he's great by any means necessary, but I think Daniel Jones can win you some games. He has a playoff win on his resume now. It took him time to kind of build up. But the New York Giants were kind of in a tough situation schedule-wise, and this year I think it's going to come to form with them a little bit because I don't really know what to expect out of the rest of the NFC East teams. I think the Dallas Cowboys take a step back. I think the Philadelphia Eagles take a step back. And I think the Washington Commanders are in a really tough situation just with a rookie head coach and a rookie quarterback. So for me, I had to take the New York Giants to win this division because I really like the culture they're starting to build a little bit. I think they're going to be competing in a lot of games. And I just think the rest of the division's kind of taking a step back. And I think it's a good roster. To be quite honest with you, I do not think the roster is terrible by any stretch, especially defensively. And Dallas I'll have going second place. I have them as a wild card team at 9 and 8. And I think the Dallas Cowboys are in that position where it's really just AFC Championship or bust. I think the game is kind of past Mike McCarthy, to be quite honest with you, to compete with the big teams in the NFL. I still think he's a very good head coach, though, and should not be on the hot seat, but I do have him on the hot seat, and I'll explain that later on. But Dallas is just in a really interesting situation right now. They don't know what to do with Dak, and they don't know what to do with some of their other players. I mean, you look at guys like Micah Parsons. It's a tough situation in Dallas right now. I think the Cowboys are kind of headed for a downward spiral, and it could potentially all just fire back in their face if things don't go well, and I don't think things will. Because it tends to be in recent years with the Cowboys, what will go wrong does go wrong. Philadelphia is my third place team. I also have them going 9 and 8. I just think they're due for a step back. I don't see them getting much better defensively. They had some significantly defensive issues last season, especially in the secondary, and Tampa Bay absolutely torched them in that playoff game. So for me, I don't see the Philadelphia Eagles making any strides to get much better. Nick Sirianni, I know local media is not a huge fan of the direction the Eagles went in from their Super Bowl year to last year, but I don't think he needs to be on the hot seat just yet. I think that's a little outlandish. I still think this team's going to go 9 and 8, and I think Jalen Hurts eventually is going to figure things out, but I think this is a very flawed roster. And obviously with the retirement of Jason Kelsey, that offensive line is going to be a little different going into this season. So I think Philadelphia is flawed. We'll have to see what they do going into the season. But I have the Giants over Dallas and Philadelphia, which will be interesting to see. But it's going to be a tough year, I think, for the Eagles and the Cowboys. And the Giants, I think, are going to benefit from that. As the Washington Commanders, I think, are just really in rebuild mode, and they're just going to start to slowly try to figure things out here. It's a rookie head coach and a rookie quarterback. I mean, there's not much else you could say there with the Washington Commanders. That team, I think, has a long way to go. All right, let's start things off in the NFC North. This division, I think, is really interesting because I think it's going to be a lot more competitive than people realize. Well, there's two teams in particular I have at the top and two at the bottom, and the two teams I have at the top are Detroit and Green Bay. Detroit's success, I think, is sustainable, so I'm going to have them winning the division at 12 and 5 yet again. Jared Goff, I think, is an underrated quarterback. I don't think he's as appreciated as we give him credit for. The man's played in the Super Bowl. I mean, it was with the Rams, but he's played with the Super Bowl. He's played in now 2 NFC championship games. He deserves some more respect, I think, in the NFL, and I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC right now, especially because of the fact he's been playing really shut-down offense since he got to Detroit. The first year, the roster was terrible, so I don't put that on him. The second year and onward, though, once Detroit started to adapt that culture that Dan Campbell put in, I think this is going to be very sustainable long-term. I think the Detroit Lions are going to be significantly in the mix this year. But I do think Green Bay is going to be a little bit more of a threat to them because we saw what Jordan Love was able to do. I think that offense is still very young and feisty, and because of that, I think they're going to be in high competition with the Detroit Lions to try to dethrone them in the NFC North. But I think they're still a year away from that. I'm going to go 11 and 6 for Green Bay, 12 and 5 for Detroit, but I really think it does come down to the wire in the NFC North between those two teams. The bottom two teams I don't trust at all. I don't trust Minnesota because J.J. McCarthy's now hurt the rest of the year. I do like Justin Jefferson, but I don't buy Sam Darnold for a 17-game season. I just don't. I do like what Minnesota's weapons are, and I do like the coaching staff. I think Kevin O'Connell just needs to hold back a year, and we're going to see Minnesota kind of develop into a bigger threat in the NFC in years to come, because I do believe in J.J. McCarthy. I do think he has potential as a quarterback, but with him being out the whole year, it's going to be essentially a rookie season for him next year. So it's going to be an interesting situation with Minnesota, but I have them finishing last in the division at 4-13, and the third place spot is going to be the Chicago Bears. I definitely am going 5-12 though. I think it's a mess what they're building. They should have never got rid of Justin Fields. In my opinion, that was a terrible move on Chicago's part. And that entire staff is on the hot seat more than anybody. Matt Eberflus is coaching for his job. I think he already knew it. He was already before the situation with Caleb Williams. But the fact that they traded Justin Fields, and I think he's going to go on to have a good season in Pittsburgh. And they went 3-14 in 2022. And then they went 7-10 in 2023. They didn't regress. They went up. But we had this talking point, the 3-14 Bears. The 3-14 Bears, they had to keep Fields. And then they went 7-10. They had a better season. I'm not saying it's good. Obviously, 7-10 isn't good. But it's better than 3-14. You build things slowly. When the Browns went 7-8-1 after going 0-16, I don't think anyone in Cleveland was complaining about it. And if I was in Chicago, I don't know if I'd be complaining. But you go from 3-14 to 7-10, and then you say the quarterback's not good enough, we got to go get Caleb Williams because we have the first overall pick that we traded for with Carolina. Please. Just please. The Bears, I think, will be ashamed of that decision when Caleb Williams, who I think is not going to pan out at all, there's just too many flaws. I think the project is massive in developing Caleb Williams into the NFL. They are going to regret it, and I think Matt Eberflus, it's going to cost him his job, and it's going to cost the front office their jobs. The Chicago Bears are a mess, in my opinion, and I think they're going to falter. I have them going 5-12, just a little bit above Minnesota, because I think the Vikings are in a more tough situation. But at the end of the day, the Chicago Bears, to me, I think, made one of the biggest mistakes we'll ever see in NFL history. And I think, obviously, we'll see in the future if it all pans out the way I think it's going to. But I think Caleb Williams is a mistake on the Bears' side of things. And that will move us down to the NFC South. New Orleans, I have bouncing back to win this division at 10-7. I think that team is good. I think Derek Carr, when he's fully healthy and has a good season under his belt, he'll be in good shape with the New Orleans Saints. They have a really good culture, I think, overall since Sean Payton left. Dennis Allen, I think, he is on the hot seat a little bit, though, with New Orleans. But that roster as a whole is pretty solid. I do think Tampa Bay takes a step back. And it's because I think Baker Mayfield's kind of streaky. He could have a really good season, then he could have a really bad one. But I still think, you have weapons like Mike Evans on that roster. You should be in pretty good shape. I have Tampa Bay finishing in third. I have Atlanta actually bumping up to second place because that roster with Bijan Robinson's really good. And you have Kirk Cousins under center. They kind of got that Favre Rodgers ideal going on there with drafting a rookie quarterback. But for me, Atlanta is kind of a bubble team. I'm not sure they're going to be great, but I think they're good. I'm going to take the Falcons at 2 and Tampa Bay at 3. And then Carolina's going to round out the bottom. I don't believe in Bryce Young at all. And it's not his fault. I just think the Carolina Panthers are a really, really bad organization. Ran incredibly poorly. My opinion, Frank Reich should still be the head coach there. In my opinion, Steve Wilkes should still be the head coach there. I think they brought in the wrong people. And I think they brought in another guy in Dave Canales, who I think they're just going to get rid of too soon. I mean, the trigger in the Carolina Panthers organization to get rid of coaches is way too quick. Just way too quick. So I cannot say the Carolina Panthers are going to have a good year. Organizationally as a whole, they're a mess. So I wish Dave Canales well, and I wish Bryce Young well. I just think it's a mess in Carolina, and it's neither of their faults. If the Carolina Panthers have an atrocious season, which I think they will, you cannot blame the head coach or quarterback. That's on the owner who's running the Carolina Panthers into the ground. All right, let's talk about the NFC West. The Los Angeles Rams, I think, have a really big bounce back year. Matthew Stafford's probably in the top conversation of NFC quarterbacks, and Brock Purdy's probably up there too. But I'm going to go LA Rams 1, San Francisco 2. I think Puka Nakua's breakout season last year is sustainable, and we see the Rams just really get themselves back into the mix after they won the Super Bowl. For me, with San Francisco, though, at 2, I just think there's a little bit more drop-off because they're kind of coming off a Super Bowl appearance hangover. And there's a lot of film on Brock Purdy now, so I think that's going to start to resonate with a lot of NFL teams. I still think he's really good, and I think Kyle Shanahan's going to have a game plan for all of it. But, I mean, I was just thinking of this the other day. In San Francisco, you draft Trey Lance with the 3rd overall pick in 2021. You trade him to the Cowboys because you realize he wasn't the guy for Mr. Irrelevant. Most of the time in the league, that gets you fired. But Kyle Shanahan and his staff, they know what they're doing. So for me, San Francisco at 2 is going to be my personal thing. I just think they're going to drop off a little bit. I still think they're a good football team overall, but the Rams, I think, are going to ascend a little bit with Sean McVay and some of the weapons they have offensively. I think that's going to be an interesting situation with the LA Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. My third place team is the Arizona Cardinals. I have them going 7-10, but I would not be surprised by this team this year if they're actually better than that. And it's not because of Kyler Murray or anything else defensively. I just think when they got Marvin Harrison Jr., that's going to really enhance their offense. They decided to keep Kyler Murray. And, Kyler Murray's had his moments. I personally don't think he's a guy long-term that's going to be sustainable success with the Arizona Cardinals. But I think Kyler Murray's good enough that if he just gets the ball to Marvin Harrison Jr., is just going to go and do the rest. So for me, Arizona could be a lot better than people realize, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So I'm going to have them at 7-10. They're a team that's still rebuilding, though, for the most part. But don't be surprised if the Arizona Cardinals go 10-7 and maybe are a bubble playoff team. That would not surprise me one bit. And then the Seattle Seahawks round out the bottom. I have them going 5-12. I just think they're kind of in a rebuild situation. Geno Smith has been a better quarterback than I thought he would be, especially 2 years ago when he became the comeback player of the year. But I personally think they're going to miss Pete Carroll a little bit. I don't know if that was the right decision to move off Pete Carroll at the time. I know age may be a thing, but he didn't he should have had that job till he retired. I say the same thing about Bill Belichick too. I'm not for forcing out legendary coaches. I just think that's the wrong move, and I think Seattle is going to regret that this year. For the NFC, my picks are the playoffs: the LA Rams with the number 1 seed, Detroit with the number 2. That'll be interesting too to see Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford's former teams at the top of the list, but we'll have to see what takes place with that in the future. The New Orleans Saints I have as the 3rd spot at 10-7. New York Giants 10-7 in the 4th. Green Bay and San Francisco 5-6, both 11-6. And then I have Dallas going 9-8 with the 7th spot. So those are my thoughts on all 32 NFL teams, along with who I think will make the playoffs this year. All right, let's talk about the top 10 coaches I think are going to be on the hot seat in 2024. And we're going to start things off at number 10, and I know a lot of people in Cleveland may not like me for this, but it's Kevin Stefanski. He was just extended with Andrew Berry, and I personally love both of them, and I think they're doing a terrific job. But here's why. And I just think of it from being a Clevelander. We are so quick to blame coaches when things go wrong. And you're not going to go 17-0 every year, or at all most of the time. It's just not going to happen. So when there's a loss, there's going to be blame. And if more of those losses come and it's not Deshaun, and if it's on Deshaun Watson, then I think we will start to see some blame towards Deshaun Watson. But there's going to be coach blame too. And just knowing Cleveland, I think Kevin Stefanski may be a surprise to some of us at number 10, but with the extension, well-deserved, Coach of the Year candidate twice and won both times. I mean, to me, I just think if the Browns season goes poorly, someone's going to get blamed for it, and it might be the coach and the quarterback. I don't think it would be the right decision to blame Kevin Stefanski, but because of how Cleveland tends to be, I just think it's possible. With that being said, I think it's highly unlikely. But I'm going to put Kevin Stefanski as my 10th coach on the hot seat just because I think if things go wrong because Deshaun Watson is just not the guy or because the offense doesn't pan out the way we all thought it would, something could go wrong with the Browns, and I think it'll be very problematic, and I think Kevin Stefanski could possibly be the fall guy for that. Should he be? I don't think so. Will he be? Probably not. But I still think that opportunity for the Browns is out there to potentially say we need to move off Kevin Stefanski if the season's a disaster and go get another guy and develop around what we have roster-wise. But to me, that could be if the Browns really get in an ugly situation. I don't think that's going to happen, but I am going to put Kevin Stefanski at number 10 for coaches on the hot seat. Number 9 is Mike McDaniel in Miami, and the reason I think it is just because he hasn't won a playoff game his 2 years there, and the roster is kind of structured to do so. But at the same time, they are in a little bit of a tougher division, so I think there is going to be more pressure on Mike McDaniel to win more games and at least advance in the playoffs. I think it's also possible the Miami Dolphins could have a really ugly season, and it goes off the wire, and then I think Mike McDaniel's going to be one of the fall guys for that. Will he be is a question mark, but it's possible. The Dolphins are not structured to have a poor season. They're structured to be at least 9-8 or better. Will they be, I think, is a big question mark, and so the Dolphins are kind of in a tough predicament with that. So I think Miami is going to, and they've had a quick trigger before. I mean, I don't think they should have fired Brian Flores, but they did. Obviously, they hired Mike McDaniel. So the Dolphins tend to have a quick trigger. I think it's possible. Unlikely, which is why I have him low on the list, but I think Mike McDaniel absolutely needs to show some more results, or else the Miami Dolphins may pull the trigger relatively fast. At number 8, Mike McCarthy in Dallas. I have him low on the list because he only had one below 500 season, and it was his first year there. So for me, I don't think Mike McCarthy should be on the hot seat. I think he's doing a good enough job in Dallas. I think it's more of a talent issue. But with that being said, with how Dallas works, I think you have to put Mike McCarthy on the hot seat. So I have him at 8. It's going to be impeccable that the Dallas Cowboys make some kind of significant playoff run, at least winning a playoff game. I think that will save Mike McCarthy's job. But I think just making the playoffs isn't enough for the Dallas standard. We'll have to see what takes place, though. I think Mike McCarthy wrongfully should be on the hot seat, but I do have him at number 8 from my perspective. Number 7, Sean Payton in Denver. Probably doesn't deserve it at all. I just think Denver's in a really bad situation, and it could come down to head coach. Will it? I don't think so, especially because they're giving him a rookie quarterback. It's his chance to develop his own guy. So I think from Sean Payton's perspective, that is going to be huge for him because it worked with Drew Brees if he could develop his own guy, and I think that the Denver Broncos could be in business with that. But that's going to be a multi-year project. And are the Denver Broncos really willing to do that? Because they've shown a quick trigger in recent years with head coaches. I wouldn't be surprised if they just say, okay, Sean Payton, we have to move on. I don't think that's the right decision because of the legendary coach Sean Payton is. I think most NFL teams know when he calls, you listen. So for me, Sean Payton is number 7. Just because I think the Denver Broncos could have quick triggers with coaches. They obviously do with quarterbacks. It's just kind of been a mess in Denver, and I think it's going to continue to be. And that's to no fault of Sean Payton, but that's just the organization right now. We'll have to see what takes place. But I would say Sean Payton is in danger of potentially losing his job if things don't go well for the Broncos this season. At number 6, Brian Daboll with the New York Giants. I think he's a great head coach. I don't think they would pull the trigger right away in year 3 for him. But if the Giants get any worse, it's not going to be good for Brian Daboll. I think the team is going to just start to restructure everything. Daniel Jones, 6th year now with the New York Giants. I can't believe it's already been 6 years since he got there. But there's going to be a lot of pressure on him, too, as the quarterback. As I said, on paper, I actually do like the Giants to have some success this year. But there's that chance that things go south. And if that's the case, I think Brian Daboll will be at fault for that. And we are going to see that the New York Giants do make some moves roster-wise and I think coaching-wise and just start from scratch. That's going to be an interesting situation in New York to monitor. At number 5, Doug Peterson with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The expectations were pretty high last year and they're pretty high this year. They're going to have to maintain it. They've won a playoff game under Doug Peterson's watch. And we're going to have to see the Jacksonville Jaguars just find a way to maintain that success. They went 9-8 back-to-back years. I think they need to elevate and get to those double-digit win seasons with Trevor Lawrence. But Trevor Lawrence does have a playoff win under his belt. So for me, I think Doug Peterson is going to be the fall guy if things go south with the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. I don't think they're going to. I think they're going to bounce back. Doug Peterson has bounced back plenty of times. You could argue he shouldn't have been fired from Philadelphia. I don't think he should have been. Who knows what he could have done with Jalen Hurts? It's a big question mark. But now that he's in Jacksonville, I think he's got something good going with the Jaguars. It's going to be interesting to see what happens and how it develops. But Doug Peterson's got some pressure on him, which is why I have him at number 5. Number 4, Dennis Allen with the New Orleans Saints. To me, I think he just has to get to the playoffs in order to save his job. Right now, I think the New Orleans Saints are in a really interesting situation where the roster is pretty good, but it could be better. I think the Saints as an organization have high expectations, especially since the Drew Brees, Sean Payton era. So it would not surprise me if things go south with the New Orleans Saints. Dennis Allen becomes the fall guy for that. So I have to put him at number 4. Number 3 on the hot seat, and this is not his fault whatsoever. He hasn't even coached a regular season game yet. It's Dave Canales with the Carolina Panthers. He had a great season with Baker Mayfield, so he knows how to work with undersized quarterbacks, and maybe he can get Bryce Young on the right track. But this is a project in Carolina, and I'm not sure ownership with the Panthers seems to realize that because they were so quick to fire Frank Reich, in my opinion, for no reason whatsoever. They didn't hire Steve Wilkes back, which was another decision I think a lot of Carolina Panther fans scratched their head on, especially seeing after Matt Rule left how well the Panthers did at the end of the season that year. And then it got even worse under Frank Reich, and that was to no fault of Frank Reich either. I just think organizationally, the Carolina Panthers are really bad. And so for Dave Canales, he's going to have to probably win 5 to 6 games, I think, to survive his rookie season as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. It's just a bad organization. It's not his fault. It's a tough situation. It's not Bryce Young's fault either. Bryce Young could have a lot of potential. I don't believe in the size, and I can criticize Bryce Young on that, but when you play for the Carolina Panthers, there's not much I could say besides you're essentially getting thrown to the wolves because of how that organization is. So for me, I think Carolina's just a bad organization. It's not Dave Canales' fault he's on the hot seat and why I have him so high, but I just would not surprise me if David Tepper pulls the trigger on a head coach really early in the season because things just go poorly and they're 0-7 or 0-8 and it's going the wrong way. We've seen him do it before. Could he do it again? It's not Dave Canales' fault at all. He shouldn't be on the hot seat. Carolina's just a bad organization. Number 2 is Robert Saleh. I know a lot of people have him at number 1. I have him at number 2 because I think there's somebody that's an even worse candidate to potentially lose his job this year. For me, Robert Saleh, it's 3 rough years. Aaron Rodgers, the injured year, I was willing to excuse, and I'm glad the New York Jets did that too. But this year, they have to produce some results. It can't just be Aaron Rodgers based, even if he gets hurt this year. The New York Jets have to show some significant improvement in order for Robert Saleh to keep his job. And as I said, as long as Aaron Rodgers is healthy, I think they will. If he gets hurt, that's probably going to hurt Robert Saleh's chances a little bit again. But if they can keep Aaron Rodgers on the field, New York Jets should be in pretty good shape, and I see Robert Saleh being in pretty good shape and saving his job. But if things go south, even with Aaron Rodgers healthy possibly, then that's going to be trouble brewing in New York. And I see the Jets absolutely making some decisions to move on. But I still think Robert Saleh brings a lot of good culture aspects to the New York Jets. He's got some really good qualities as a defensive coordinator, too. Great defensive mind. But Robert Saleh's definitely got some pressure on him to win some games this year. And finally, Matt Eberflus of Chicago is my number 1 pick, and it's just because I think the Bears are a disgrace right now. I think they made the wrong move to go draft Caleb Williams and move off of Justin Fields. Matt Eberflus is a defensive-minded guy, and the Bears have typically been a defensive organization. But the Bears are really in kind of a bad shape situation for my take. I just think it's really bad what's going on in Chicago. And if they don't take Caleb Williams and give him a winning record this year, if he doesn't have a C.J. Stroud type season, which I don't think he will, I don't see Matt Eberflus surviving beyond 2024 with the Chicago Bears. I think it's a really tough situation with Chicago right now, and we'll have to see what takes place. But those are my 10 coaches on the hot seat. You could agree with me, disagree with me. You can check out the show online, Hoty Raw Takes on Instagram, or you could follow me on X at Hoty Andrew. So let me know your thoughts. But my top 10 coaches, once again, Kevin Stefanski from Cleveland at 10, Mike McDaniel with Miami at 9, Mike McCarthy at 8, from Dallas, 7, Sean Payton from Denver, Brian Dable with New York Giants at 6, at 5, Doug Peterson with Jacksonville, 4, Dennis Allen with New Orleans, 3, Dave Canales with Carolina, 2, Robert Saleh with the New York Jets, and number 1, Matt Eberflus with the Chicago Bears. We're going to move off football, and we're going to wrap up the show talking a little bit about some baseball. Alex Cobb was on the 15-day injured list for the Guardians, and the Guardians had a really rough weekend with the Milwaukee Brewers. I'm excited to see what they do with the New York Yankees. Hopefully they're able to rattle off some wins here, but for me, it's kind of nerve-wracking to watch this team right now offensively, because the Guardians, they are so good, I think, in the bullpen that it really just hurts everything else around the team. I mean, the offensive lineup was so good at the beginning of the year, but we've seen them falter at times. They kind of come back down to earth. And the pitching rotation is starting to kind of pick up the pace a little bit. We saw Matthew Boyd have a good outing. Alex Cobb, before he got hurt, had a good outing. I thought Tanner Bybee pitched pretty well over the weekend, and so did Ben Lively. But that was offensive losses. So, to me, Stephen Kwan kind of being in a little bit of slump has hurt the Guardians. I think Josh Naylor has done his part. Jose, for the most part, has done his part. But David Fry not being the David Fry we saw back in May, that's kind of hurt his chances. But he's kind of picked it up a little bit in recent games. To me, with the Guardians, it's really just some things are coming back down to earth and some things are just getting better. The pitching rotation, I think, has gotten better, but the offense got worse in the process. So are they going to be able to pick up the slack and hopefully find their way to maintain the division lead? We'll have to see. But I still think the Guardians would be very hard-pressed to not make the playoffs with the kind of season they've had. They have to make the playoffs. I'm not even expecting them to win a playoff series because I think there's a lot of tough competition in the AL right now. But you just have to get there. If anything is shown, the Arizona Diamondbacks got there last year One of the only teams that swept the Guardians this year in the regular season, by the way. But if the Arizona Diamondbacks showed you anything last year, it's that you just get to the dance, anything could happen. So we'll have to see what takes place in terms of the Guardians. Obviously, the Alex Cobb news stinks. And Lane Thomas, that trade's been pretty bad too. I mean, what's he done since he's gotten to the Guardians? Big question mark for my friends in Cleveland and all Guardians fans. But it'll be interesting to see what happens as the season goes on. As we come down to really winding down into September, they still kind of have a little bit of a tough road ahead too. I know they still have to play Houston again, obviously the Yankees. Pittsburgh is kind of, I know I'm going to one of the Pittsburgh games next week, but they're an interesting situation because they're not really great, but they have good players like Paul Skeens. So still tough series ahead for the Guardians. It'll be interesting to see what takes place. Hopefully they figure things out in terms of that. The Major League Baseball field is definitely a big challenge, I think, for the Guardians moving forward. But we'll have to see what happens. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first edition of Raw Takes. We will be back this upcoming week with more information on sports right here with me, Andrew Hoty. Can't wait to be joining you guys once again. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check out the show on Instagram at Hoty Raw Takes. Also follow me on X at Hoty Andrew if you have any feedback for what I thought, because I'm Andrew Hoty, and those are my Raw Takes.